I want to say a few words today about imagination and reality. Years ago, when I wrote the book Letters to the River, A Guide to a Dream Worth Living, that whole book was an inquiry into the question, what is reality? Or what determines the reality that we live in? And it was very obvious that to me, it was very obvious that we all look at the world through a lens. And partly the lens we use determines the world that we see, perceive, and live in. So a simple physical example of that is that if you had a camera and you wanted to take a picture of a mountain range, you would obviously use a telephoto lens. And when you looked through that lens, it brought the mountains close to you where you could see them and have a really positive experience. It brought things that were far away very close. Now, obviously, it wouldn't help at all to try and look at or take a picture of that mountain range through a microscope. In fact, it would all be a blur and you couldn't understand it at all. So a microscope is a very different lens, but it's one that's incredibly useful for a lot of things. In fact, most of our medical advances would not have been possible without a microscope. A microscope is a very useful lens in a particular context, and it's helped us, increase the lifespan of many a person and save innumerable lives. So, so the lens we look at the world with will have a great effect on determining the world we perceive and see. And I used the expression in that book very often, and I'll probably use it many more times. We see the world the way we are, not the way it is. So, so I want to speak a little bit about, how do we, what are the worlds we see, and which one, what makes some of them useful and good and helpful, and what makes others even not useful or even toxic. So one of the years ago, I also read a book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, and he had a very interesting framework which I thought was really helpful. He said that we always live fundamentally in three different realities. The first reality he called primal reality or objective reality. And primal reality is the world of trees, rocks, oceans, wind, the world of the elements, of gravity, of all of those forces of the world that we have to take into account if we want to survive. And one of the qualities of primal reality is it is just there, and it is not changed by how we think of it. It is not changed by our beliefs about it. Say, for example, we could somehow come to a belief that we're free from gravity, or we have some magical power that allows us to float through the air. But even if we have that belief and we step off the roof of a building, we will fall to our death at the very same rate as someone who believes that gravity does exist. So primal reality is not affected by what or how we think about it. The second level of reality that he talked about was what he called subjective reality. That's our inner world, the world of our emotions, our dreams. And subjective reality, not only does it not affect primal reality, it really doesn't affect anyone else but us. So if tomorrow morning I wake in a dream in which I've been running away terrified because something horrible is pursuing me, aliens or the mob or something like that. I may wake up just shivering and very upset. And but that upset of mine doesn't affect not only anything but anyone else. I might call up a friend to get emotional support, and that friend, he or she, may give me that kind of emotional support. But the fact that I've woken up in all of this distress doesn't mean that that friend, that either he or she is feeling any distress at all, although the support they give me could be very helpful. So that's subjective reality, a reality that's just our own, that has to do with the way we're constructed internally. And then the third kind of reality that Harari talked about was intersubjective reality. These intersubjective reality is made up of fictions, imaginary things that once they're believed in by multiple people can become a big part of the reality we live in. So I'll just give an example. Most people in the world are familiar with what a day is. Everybody in the world knows what a day is. But a day is a cycle that exists in primal objective reality. It's the amount of time it takes for the Earth to spin on its axis. Another cycle that exists in a primal reality is the cycle of a year, and a year is the amount of time it takes for the Earth to rotate around the sun. So people all over the world live with days and years. But we also have this idea of a week, and there is no cycle of 7 that refers to anything in primal reality. And yet, because we've come up with that concept, and we've millions of people agree to it, it becomes part of our lives. We structure where we spend our time. We structure, the amount of time we work is based on this artificial concept of a week. When we take vacations is based on this concept. So there are a lot of, again, totally imaginary things that structure the way we live, which have no basis in primal reality. Another one we might use as an example is money. If I held in my hand a wad of $50 bills, I might, let's just say I hold $10,000 in my hand. In primal reality, those are just a bunch of pieces of paper. I could chew on them, but they wouldn't feed me. They would blow away with the wind. But since we all agree on money and all its different rules, I can trade those, in some sense, worthless or arbitrary pieces of paper for carrots, which do exist in primal reality and will help me live. I can trade it for carrots or cars or any other thing I might want. Another example is the world now is organized into nations. And say, for example, 3,000 years ago, the concept of Egypt came into being. And the concept of Egypt was filled with another bunch of related concepts. It was ruled by the pharaoh, and the pharaoh was the representation or manifestation of the sun god on earth. And the pharaoh made laws and decided, and those laws determined what people could do or couldn't do. So because that concept, or the idea of Egypt, or any other nation for that matter, came into being, the pyramids could be built. Because before the concept of Egypt, if you wanted to build the pyramids, you would have to talk in, you'd have to get an agreement between probably 40 to 80 people a human being actually knows in his or her life. But all of a sudden, with the concept of Egypt, some huge number of people, 1 million, 2 million, I don't know how many people lived in that part of the world then, but once they thought of themselves as Egyptians, you could harness the power of tens of thousands of people to build the pyramids and organize them how they would work, and what their schedule was. So these arbitrary concepts, like money, like nations, like corporations like Toyota or something, make up intersubjective reality. And most of our problems and struggles come from the fact that the laws and the limitations of intersubjective reality, the things we've agreed to, do not fit either primal reality or they do not fit our subjective reality, what makes us tick and what we find meaningful. So anyway, so I want to use an example of how sometimes reality gets created. When thinking about language and culture and conditioning, an example I came up with is the Big Dipper. So we know this constellation, and if we step outside at night and turn our faces toward the northern sky, we'll likely see the constellation it's called the Big Dipper. It's one of the most recognizable constellations in the heaven, and many people learned its familiar shape in childhood, as I did. I think I was about 8 years old when my father took me out into the field beside the house and pointed out those 7 stars and connected the dots, and at that moment the Big Dipper started to exist for me. But I have this example. Does the Big Dipper really exist? So is it real? Obviously, the stars are real. Those are part of primal reality. But who connected those stars, those 7 stars, with dots? Why not something else? It's quite arbitrary when you really think about it. Of the thousands of stars visible in the night sky, and scientists say there's about 2,000 in a very clear night, to make the Big Dipper, we separate and group a few of those stars, 7 of them, and then lines are drawn between those stars to create an image that we pay attention to. And we call it the Big Dipper. We do the same with Leo the lion or Orion the hunter. But are those figures really there? In physical reality, no lines connect those 7 stars included in the Big Dipper. And it's obvious that those lines could have been drawn in other ways. If my childhood had been different, I might gaze skyward today and see a bridge, a kangaroo, an alligator, or an anthill. One could look at the night sky and see virtually anything, and the heavens could be populated by completely dissimilar shapes and beings from the ones we know. Shapes other people have connected and done and seen and called names throughout history. So to create the Big Dipper, though, 2 important things have to happen. First, those 7 stars have to be grouped together, and they have to be grouped together and seen in relationship to each other and not to the other 2,000 stars of the sky. So to create that relationship, that picture, thousands of other relationships and possible arrangements have to be ignored or denied. And then secondly, the relationship of those 7 remaining stars has to be perceived in only one particular way. Otherwise, we might see a jack-in-a-box or deformed pear or just a knot of tangled yarn, or who knows what. And it's important to realize that this process takes place with almost everything we perceive in the world. Our whole reality and known world is an interpretation as arbitrary as the Big Dipper, one that denies or completely ignores limitless other possibilities. But though my mind knows that constellation isn't real in some sense, I can't simply look at the sky and decide to not see it anymore, or to see something else, whether I want to or not. Once I grasp, accept, and constellate the image, as I did when I was 8 years old, it takes a great deal of determination and effort on my part to erase it. But many people today are, quote, taking medicine, taking LSD, psilocybin, iboga, very many other substances of plant medicine. And in doing that, that common view of the world, it's very easy to look at the sky under medicine and not see the Big Dipper, to see a vast, limitless almost sense of possibilities. So by taking medicine, we all have the possibility of opening up our perception and seeing other worlds. And that, in a certain sense, is a gift. But it's a gift with its own limitations. Just because on medicine, all of a sudden the world or the sky is constellated in different ways, whatever ways it's constellated is just one way amongst thousands of other ways. So if tonight I took medicine, I had a long and profound journey, I could come back very emotionally euphoric. It could give me a great emotional lift. And I might see things that are beautiful, that have possibilities, and that had a kind of fluidity that didn't exist for me before. And yet at the same time, that's a limited world. And it has one particular limit that I want to say now, and I'll go into it at another time. One of the things about normal reality, and everyone can agree that our normal reality has its limitations, but it has evolved to work and fit and be harmonious with the physical primal world. Yeah, there may be many things about normal reality that seem rigid or limited, but when we're in it, we drive on the right side of the street. We don't step off of the tops of buildings. We know what to do and not to do to survive. We know certain things not to eat, and we know what to eat. Now, great if we have a luminous and fluid world that all of a sudden makes us feel there are other possibilities. But just because there are other possibilities, it's likely that those possibilities, those worlds, have not evolved to be harmonious with primal reality. And so many of the insights or many of the beautiful worlds we can experience taking medicine are just that. They're just beautiful worlds. But to have them be useful and meaningful, we have to in some way translate, bring parts of that vision back and integrate it with the world we know, because it's the world we know that can function and live and survive and be effective in primal reality. I'll probably continue on this theme in some posts to come. Thank you.